George Stephanopoulos.
And we are back. I want to go to our ballot watch team now, starting with our Chief Justice correspondent, Pierre Thomas. Pierre, Homeland Security, FBI, other law enforcement had been concerned about voter intimidation and violence before the election. What are they telling you now?
George, there's growing concern about this incendiary rhetoric that is coming out. Concerns about comments about elections being stolen. The fact that there's fraud and all these allegations that are so far baseless. And tonight, law enforcement officials are paying particular attention to former White House officials, even calling for the FBI director and Dr. Anthony Fauci to be harmed, George. So law enforcement officials say this kind of rhetoric could inspire fringe elements to actually do something. They're concerned. They would like these votes to be counted and for this election to be known very soon, George.
Okay, thank you, Pierre. Dan Abrams, Chief Legal Analyst. Let's walk through what would constitute voter fraud, what would constitute illegal voting, and what the evidence would be.
Well, first of all, let's recognize what always happens in elections. There are issues, there are problems, there are oversights, there are errors. I'm afraid you're going to now see people trying to amplify what happened in any election to suggest that, oh my goodness, this is massive voter fraud, or this is so irregular. It's not. To demonstrate voter fraud, which we haven't seen in any of the filings yet, or even major irregularities, you're going to have to show either individual voters, or it sounds like people who are working at the polls intending to engage in this sort of fraud. Now, voter intimidation, separate issues, and that we were fortunate that that didn't happen in this election on a wide-scale basis. But keep your eye now, listening to what you're now seeing some of the president's allies talking about, keep your eye on isolated examples that they're now going to try to, I think, pull out to say this needs to be looked at more broadly, and as a result, I'm not ready to accept the results of the election. That is not voter fraud. If they have it, they should present it in court.
Okay, and Kate Shaw, one of the other things we saw the president talk about tonight is basically asking the Supreme Court to get involved in this election.
That's right. You know, he's been saying this for some time, but of course, you need a case to take to the Supreme Court. It needs to be a case that has a legal argument that supports it. And maybe most importantly, you need evidence to back up that argument. And I think that despite these claims of voter fraud, which, as you said earlier in the hour, George, President Trump has been making since 2016 when he claimed millions of illegal votes were cast for Hillary Clinton, convened a commission, no evidence was ever found, and it was disbanded. So just as no evidence ever materialized in 2016, no evidence appears to be materializing now. And in order to go into court to make an argument that could get to the Supreme Court, you have to have evidence. You know, so the claims of the sort that the president has been making in the kind of political register, we haven't seen made in court. And again, it seems to be because there is just no evidence, and no, lawyer who's an officer of the court can make a claim that doesn't have evidence to support it.
And to amplify on that, right now, this isn't even close to the Supreme Court.
No, that's right. So, we've had a few of these lawsuits, suit in Georgia challenging a couple of dozen absentee ballots, how they were treated, suits in Michigan and Pennsylvania regarding how poll workers are getting access to observe the counting processes. The Trump campaign touted a victory in Pennsylvania today, but was really just about kind of rearranging furniture in a counting location so that the Trump campaign observers had a little bit more access. But that's not the sort of thing that would ever head to the Supreme Court. The one case that is out there is the challenge to the votes that arrive in Pennsylvania that arrived after Tuesday and up until tomorrow. And the Trump campaign is seeking to join that case. It was actually ongoing even before the election, and those ballots are right now being segregated. So that's the one case you could imagine could end up before the Supreme Court. But I have to say, right now the Trump campaign wants those ballots out. But if it happens that the vote totals there flip and Biden looks like he's on top in Pennsylvania, I could well see them switching positions and wanting those ballots in, because that might be a way to make up some votes. So we will see.
Okay, thank you, Kate. Terry Moran, I can't imagine Chief Justice Roberts eager to take on this case.
No, this would put the Supreme Court right in the middle of not just an election dispute, but really a cultural war that is at the base of all this, that President Trump is trying to inflame in order to maintain power. Look, let's look at it straight. This is a test. It's a test of our election system. It's a test of our institutions, and it's a test really of each one of us as Americans. There is a time-honored preferred lawful way of settling election disputes, as Chris Christie was saying. It takes place both in the court of public opinion, but also in courts of law. In the court of public opinion, you can say whatever you want. It doesn't matter if you have any evidence. You can say your inauguration crowd was the biggest in history. You can say the election's being stolen. In the court of law, however, as Chris points out, you need evidence. The burden of proof is a tough thing for a lot of people to meet, and that is really President Trump's problem. The question is he going to use the court of public opinion to try to bypass the court of law? That's the invitation that he is beginning to extend to each American. And some Americans, as Pierre is pointing out, law enforcement is concerned, might take that invitation up. My hunch is most won't. They'll wait for the courts to do their work.
Byron Pitts, thank you, Terry. Byron Pitts, Terry just used the phrase cultural war.
Yeah, I mean, George, and listen to the president today. He could have said Tucson, but instead he said Detroit. He could have said Scranton, Pennsylvania, or State College. He said Philadelphia. And I think, as our president has said, it is what it is, right? This fits a pattern with him. And George, also, I've been thinking, listening to Chris Christie talk and some of the other Republicans, it seems like we may be approaching one of those Barry Goldwater moments, right? In 1974, he went to the president and said, sir, for the sake of the country, the party, you need to back away. And this is something, as you know, I always look at history to see when we're in some moment. And this is a quote from Barry Goldwater. Those who seek absolute power, even though they seek to do what they regard as good, are simply demanding their own version of heaven on earth. And it seems to me the president made clear tonight his version of heaven on earth is staying in the White House, keeping his job, as opposed to honoring our election system.
Byron Pitts, thank you. Martha Raddatz, test of all our institutions, as Terry Moran just said. The president is also commander-in-chief, and the top brass in the military put out the word clearly over the weekend and the days leading up to this election that they want no part of this election.
And they have no part in this election, whether disputed or otherwise, and they have no part in the transfer of power. Mark Milley, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, did make it very clear. He said the Constitution and laws of the U.S. and the states establish procedures for carrying out elections and for resolving disputes over the outcome. I do not see the U.S. military as part of this process. That is what he wrote to Congress a few months ago when the question was asked from members of Congress. They want nothing to do with this. If you remember, of course, Mark Milley was on his way to Lafayette Square with President Trump in that photo op. He was terribly embarrassed by that. He apologized after that for being anywhere near that photo opportunity.
And Martha, you're our chief global affairs anchor as well. What's your sense of how the world is watching what's happening here right now?
I think this really unnerves our allies. It truly does. They want to stay out of it. They want to wait for the final results. But it also emboldens and delights our adversaries. There's a quote here today from a Putin-aligned Russian lawmaker who told state media there, whoever wins the legal battles, half of Americans will not consider them the lawful president. Let's stock up on large quantities of popcorn. This is exactly the kind of chaos and disarray that we heard from the president and these baseless accusations that Russia loves.
Russian goal for the last several years, so distrust in our democratic system. Martha Raddatz, thanks very much. We're going to take another quick break.